All right, welcome everybody. My name is Parviz Malakouti Fitzgerald. I'm a citizenship and mobility attorney, and this is our 15th mobility space. And today we're talking about the best OPSEC privacy and security practices when crossing borders. And this, just as a reminder, this space is part of our series of mobility spaces this year. We're doing 50 mobility spaces on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, travel, and sovereignty. So today we want to talk about kind of this. It's not really a new issue, but it's an issue that's been coming a lot more to the forefront in recent months and years, I would say, and that's basically your privacy, protecting your privacy when you cross borders. Now, there's a lot of different aspects of how to protect your privacy, and we're going to talk about them. We're joined here by Italian Stallion, by the way, and he's co-hosting with us, Italian Stallion of Plan B, and he deals with a lot of OPSEC issues and freedom of movement and sovereignty as well. So I'll just kick off by starting with how I think about the issues, and then of course we'll open up the discussion. We'll get Italians' viewpoints, and then anybody can speak. So as a reminder, this is an open discussion. If you want to speak, just send me a request, and I will approve it right away. So a couple of things. So when it comes to actually crossing borders and protecting the information that you have that you're carrying on you, I think about it in a few different categories. So the first one, which I and a few others have been discussing recently on Twitter, is protecting your passports and other chipped cards from being scanned. So basically, protecting through RFID blockers and other similar devices while you're going through the airport, as well as any other public area as well too. The second category I think about is protecting your data on electronic devices through technology, okay? And then the third category I think about is protecting the data on your electronic devices through the law, right? So basically trying to avail yourself, first of all, identify what protections you have under law, and then basically be as prepared as possible to protect your data in case you're taken aside by a border official and demanded to produce your cell phone. So that's kind of the three categories. The way I think about protecting the information, your information as you're going through the passport. And then there's this other category, which if we have time, I'd like to talk about as well, which is the choice of what passport to travel on if you're a multiple citizen, and then what you can kind of do in order to make sure that your passport throws off as little information as possible, right? And there's three things that come to my mind right away. One is the place of birth, and we spoke about this in our last mobility spaces. Some countries' passports, even if you naturalize there, will have you list your place of birth, right? And if that place of birth is in another country, then that's obviously divulging additional information about yourself. That's number one. And then number two, piggybacking on what was tweeted this morning by Patience is Alpha, where your passport is issued, okay, can actually throw off information about yourself, about where you reside. And that's because a lot of countries will only allow you to renew a passport in a consulate in a country in which you reside. So if you're renewing your passport from a country, okay, that only allows you to reside in an area that you're resident in, if that passport is issued by a consulate that's outside of that country, well, that's giving away an indicator that you might have residence there. And then the third category that comes to my mind is, unfortunately, some passports, some countries' passports have started making an indicator in the passport if you're a dual citizen, if they know you to be a dual citizen, and also showing in that passport what the other country of citizenship that you have is. And this is something that the UK started doing. Well, actually, I don't know when they started doing it, but I first became aware, and I think the public kind of started becoming aware of this like 7-8 years ago or so. So this is kind of how I think about some of the important issues here, the categories. Again, this is an open discussion. Nobody is obligated to agree, right? If you disagree, speak up and let us know otherwise. But I'd like to start off the space with a question, right? So here's a question for Italian. Actually, let me go to Patrick first, and then we're going to come to Italian Stallion, who I'm sure is going to have a lot of great information to share about how he thinks about OPSEC while traveling through borders. Okay, so the first question I have for you, Patrick, is this: how important do you think it is to travel through airports and public spaces with RFID blockers to protect the information that's on your passport. And in importance, let's break that down into kind of two sub issues. One is how effective are RFID blockers, do you think? And then secondly, how much of an attack vector is somebody being able to scan your information on your passport? How much does it matter to be able to protect that information? What do you think, Patrick?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the first question. I'm actually going to defer to Stallion on this in pretty short order. I generally don't know the level of importance this has. I know that it's important, but I don't know if that's a 3 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, because the barriers for RFID protection on any sort of chipped travel documents like a passport is so low that I think that it's worth it. Uh, whether that risk is small or large. But I would say that if one is to be a little bit obsessive compulsive about it, it would be to have an RFID protection for your chipped travel documents, and potentially your electronic devices, particularly if they're still on, like a cell phone of some kind. Um, just because the information on any sort of travel document is identifiable, is personally identifiable information for you, and that standard also holds true for electronic devices. Um, and I don't know the extent to which you are protecting yourself from other people who might be nefarious actors, or the inadvertent scoop of information that's collected through any sort of government or institutional security thresholds. Um, and at the very least, it also, we know that a lot of information that's collected gets sold potentially to either government agencies or other, large scaled corporations. So I see the barrier for a base level protection to be pretty low for what is, to the best of my knowledge, an unknown, but some measurable, either moderate to severe, risk. So I'll defer to Stalin, because I think he's going to have a lot more insight on this than me.
While we're waiting for him to pop in, would it be possible to go over exactly what kind of information can be gleaned from the RFID chips in different passports?
Yeah, sure. So I have a really rudimentary understanding of this. As I understand it, an RFID reader on your passport can basically give a bunch of information from the passport. First of all, what's on the page. So basically name, passport number, that type of stuff. And I believe there's also information that can be thrown off as well that doesn't actually appear on the page. Unfortunately, that's kind of the extent of my knowledge on the topic so far. Patrick, do you know anything more about what exactly can be read by RFID readers?
Yeah, so you pretty much hit the nail on the head. It is all of the information that you can read on your passport, so identification numbers. I'm sorry, personal information, personally identifying information. Whew, it's been a long day so far. Uh Passport like details, so your number, the issuing country, the date, the expiration, like pretty standard stuff that is typically already communicated on a passport page. A digital version of your photograph. So basically when they run it in the machine and you don't see it, but they have the dashboard readout. um, they also have a unique identifier for the chip, and then basically like a cryptographic digital signature that basically says that this passport is real. And so those are what's in it. So if you can read that, it's not necessarily any huge advantage over just what you can read on the document. But I don't know if that like digital signature can be recreated or identified. But that key right there is the one thing that you can't see on a passport, is your ability to determine that it's an authentic, like the real deal. It's not a counterfeit travel document.
Yeah, you know what? As I'm listening to you speak, Patrick, first of all, RFID blockers, right, are like so cheap, right? They're like 5, 10, 15 bucks on Amazon. By the way, anybody listening to this who doesn't have an RFID blocker or a set of them, you might want to get it. Both one you can put in your wallet to protect, against your credit cards, and then also pouches that you can use for your passport and other stuff. But even RFID readers, as far as I can see, are pretty cheap. I think I'm seeing them online for $15, $20, $25. You know what? I'm just going to commit myself right now. I'm going to basically just do some ad hoc experiments with, my own passport and, the readers and the blockers, and just try to read it and see how far away, these things read from and what shows. That's kind of an easy experiment. Not very scientific, but it's kind of an easy basic experiment that I can do, and I'll be sure to either write up the results or maybe I'll bring it up in one of our future spaces. Anyway, so the RFID thing, I mean, what Patrick is referring to as the relatively low cost is just how cheap the RFID blockers are. And I put up a poll on both X and both LinkedIn, and I asked, do you use an RFID blocker to protect your passport when you're traveling through airports or other public places? And for what it's worth, these were the results. So I made 4 potential options. Okay, 1 is yes, 2 is no, it's not necessary, 3 is no, never heard of it, and the 4th option I gave was no, but I will soon, right? And 24% were yes. 21% chose no, it's not necessary. 38% no, chose no, never heard of it, and 17% no, but I probably will soon. So the plurality was no, never heard of it, right? Now this is on LinkedIn, older crowd. But generally, I think that kind of is roughly and by the way, just for the raw numbers, it was 29 votes in total. It kind of gives a rough idea of outside of the tech crowd, the OPSEC crowd, how kind of little known this thing is, right? I think if more people knew about this attack vector, they'd probably be more interested in finding out, what an RFID blocker can do and obviously implementing it. The second category that I spoke about is protecting your data on electronic devices through technology. And then the third category is protecting your data on electronic devices through law, basically knowing what protections you might have available to you through law, and kind of how to deal with CBP officials. On that second category, that's not a strong point of mine. I'm not a tech guy, right? But we've seen a lot of stories recently, especially since Trump came into office, of American citizens that are that have been coming through the border to the United States and have been taken aside by CBP and had their electronic devices searched. And it's tough to tell whether there's actually been a spike, right, in those instances, or if it's just more coverage by the media. It's not a new thing that American CBP can search electronic devices at the border without a warrant for Americans coming back in. But there's obviously been way more attention given to it. And I actually pulled up, first I tweeted a year ago, the CBP statistics. CBP keeps statistics on how many electronic devices they search. I posted it a year ago, and then I went and actually found the same stats again today, and I posted it I linked it basically below this mobility space. So if anybody wants to pull this up, they can. Okay, and this just gives you an idea. And so for fiscal year 2024, the first quarter, 10,937 total border searches were conducted. And that's referring specifically to searches of electronic devices. Q2 in 2024, 11,273. Fiscal year 24, Q3, 12,090. Okay, I won't go through every quarter, but let's just skip ahead to the last 2 quarters that we have statistics for. Fiscal year 2025, Q1, 12,092, and fiscal year 25 Q2 12,260. So a little bit of a bump up, right, from fiscal year 2024. We're talking about from high 10,000s and low 11,000s up to 12,000 and change, but not crazy, not like what might be given, what the appearance might be given by media, which is like a threefold or a fourfold. We're talking about 10, 11,000 to roughly 12,000, right? And just as a reminder, I mean, there's a lot of confusion of what CBP can do at the border, what exactly their their rights are. So obviously in the United States, we have the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable search and seizure. The upshot is, and people say there's kind of this common phrase, there's no Fourth Amendment, at the border. A Fourth Amendment doesn't exist at the border. That, mostly kind of captures the gist of what the law is, but really technically what's going on is there's the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and searches at the border are presumed to be reasonable. Okay, so you can't really assert much of a Fourth Amendment right against search and seizure at the border, but that doesn't mean that CBP has carte blanche to do whatever they want, right? There is, a very little known, I think, relatively little known CBP internal memo, right? That basically gives instruction for what CBP officers have to do if the person, if they want to search a person's electronic device and the person claims that there's confidential information on there. Okay. And I've also linked to that memo. It's a 2018 memo that's linked to this space. And the upshot is the memo requires CBP to contact the CBP Chief Counsel office before conducting a search if the subject of the search, this is the first part, asserts part of the contents are subject to attorney-client privilege. Okay, so that's relevant to lawyers, right? Now, most people are not lawyers, right? So what about confidential information that's not, attorney-client privilege? There's also search protocols in the memo for other sensitive documents claimed to be medical records, journalistic documents, or business or commercial information, right? Now, if a CBP officer is really motivated to search your device, do I think, jumping through these extra hoops are necessarily going to stop them? No, probably not. But I think any additional friction that's added to not just a CBP officer, but any type of bureaucrat that's trying to do something that's intrusive is beneficial to you, right? If they have to basically go and contact a lawyer's office, or an office of chief counsel within their agency, and then hear back for instructions before they go forward, that extra bit of friction might make it so that either it's not worth it for the CBP officer to go through with the search, or who knows, maybe they I don't know, maybe they get off their shift or something, and the new CBP officer doesn't continue with the search. So I think that's important to know. I actually keep a copy of that CBP memo, and obviously it's on my phone, but I don't want to show my phone, right, when I'm going through either TSA or CBP. So I actually keep a paper copy of that anytime I travel internationally. And I think that's important for everybody to have access to, even if you're not a lawyer, right? You probably want to at least have some sort of leg to stand on if you're going to resist giving your cell phone over to CBP for them to search. Now, we talk about cell phones, of course, often because we pretty much assume everybody has a cell phone, but electronic devices, also include, of course, laptops as well. Okay, so we got Italian here, we got Alex, we got Patrick, we got David, we got Esther. Would love to hear from other people here about what you think are, best practices or protocols, or you don't have to say exactly what you do if you don't feel comfortable, but of course, if you want to share kind of what your protocols are, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'd like to revisit that hierarchy that you laid out, Parviz, at the beginning, between your travel documents, um, kind of your informational devices. I'd like to throw in an additional category, and that is any physical goods that you're bringing across an international border that open you up to a risk vector. And I can give a couple examples, but uh, you know, one of my many vices is I do enjoy the occasional cigar. So, bringing back a handful of Cuban cigars across the U.S. border is something I do regularly, and I'm okay admitting that out loud, because it's for personal consumption, of which the U.S. has a policy where you are allowed to bring back Cuban cigars for personal consumption. What is that threshold? It's kind of up to the border officer to determine what is allowed and what isn't. If I show up with 6 boxes, I'm probably going to get stopped and they're going to confiscate those. If I'm walking back with just 6 cigars, it's going to be fine, right? But I bring that up as an example because in this case it's very specific because it's goods clearly from an embargoed country. But if it is something that is presumed that you might be reselling, um, that's a vector for risk. It is if you're bringing, many years ago, I had a coworker who was traveling in Latin America, and his then girlfriend and future ex-girlfriend decided that she really liked coca leaves, and she tried to bring coca leaves across the border, not knowing that in Bolivia it's treated like weeds, but in the U.S. it's treated as you know a class A controlled substance. Um, and then it also leads to things like if you are traveling with a prescription, you want to make sure that you have that prescription documented and not on your phone, but with a physical paper, because you can be questioned about that as well. And I've seen that for things as silly as a prescription for someone who is traveling with a pair of glasses. And this is not always U.S. CPB, but it can also be the uh, the border officers at another country where there might be different rules and regulations around the reselling of goods or prescription drugs or anything like that. And so I think having a cognizant wherewithal understanding of what is a risk factor and what is not a risk factor when crossing the border, you know, is an additional kind of OPSEC perspective when transiting.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on another point that I think is important, which is kind of reverting back to low tech paper when you're trying to cross through borders in order to, have proof of things. We're so used to just having everything accessible on our phones, right? That we kind of just, open up the phone, show the proof, give the proof. Maybe even, I don't do this, but a lot of people will even hand their phone, to somebody to see the thing. And that's obviously super risky because your cell phone is insight into your brain. Okay, it's basically your cell phone has your deepest, darkest secrets. Okay, your confidential information that you have of other people, especially if you're a lawyer or a consultant that handles sensitive information. So I've reverted back to having things on paper, right? So like Patrick said, paper prescription. Even the tickets, when possible, like to have a paper copy of it. I even have a paper copy of my U.S. passport, in order to be able to avoid, having to show that document, the actual passport when necessary. So I think the way I look at your cell phone and electronic devices when passing through borders is this device can hold, and obviously, depends on what you do to prepare, but as far as, possibly wiping the device of information before you go through, but it can hold sensitive information, right? And you don't want to, you don't want to be able to, you don't want to be forced to have to show that if necessary, or even to physically give it outside of your possession, right? I've never seen this happen in person, right? But I've found some shows, some TV shows, about CBP to be instructive, where a person, shows something, they mean to just show something on their phone, and the CBP officer just takes the phone and starts scrolling, scrolling through the homepage, scrolling through the pictures, all that type of stuff. I mean, that's horrible, right? And obviously, the first step for allowing that to happen was handing over control of your cell phone in order to show evidence. So, paper, anything evidentiary that you might want to show, I think paper is the way, right? Just get away from having the cell phone out. Well, I mean, having it out and basically accessible, physically accessible to the CBP officer.
Yeah, I think it's an important topic. Uh, we're right now very US focused, I think with good reason. I wonder if anyone has thoughts on different borders besides the US border in terms of crossing.
Yeah, I can add a little bit here. I'm going to flex a little bit of my American privilege here. But my experience is that generally I've never run into any issues between mostly American and European ports of entry. There's just less scrutiny if you have if you're able to like access with the designated line for, say, American and EU passport holders, right? However, I think that privilege can also have a different side of the coin, if you're not traveling through these countries where there's a little bit more transparency and regulation, that privilege can also mean that you're assumed to be someone who's wealthy or willing to skirt local laws. And so I think that, there has been situations where I have been stopped um, at border thresholds, primarily in Latin America, where they assume that you unknowingly broke a law or are transmitting goods that are not legal to be, transported. And so they decide that there's going to be some sort of search or whatnot. And your ability, of course, as a non-citizen is different, right? Um, let alone whether or not that perspective is enforced. So I think the reason that this is such a important topic is because of the risks that you might find crossing an international border into or out of the United States or into and out of Europe can vary significantly if you're going into and out of a port of entry in, say, Latin America or some parts of Asia. I mean, it's been a while since I've been to China, but there are countries, same with Russia, there are countries where, your information is far more valuable than anything they could search for you on person. So I think understanding those risks and how they can vary dynamically between countries and the incentives of those border officials is kind of key to getting the full perspective as to why this is a valuable topic.
Great points. We kind of jumped ahead actually to even, the concept of, we just jumped ahead to kind of assuming, right, first of all, border, controlled border, and then a controlled border that's, that requires some sort of, obviously this is less of an issue in countries and areas where either there's no border at all or there's no controlled border, right? Within Shenzhen, right, for example, or for example, United States is obviously one country, but within the United States, the issue of how much to think about, how much preparation you're going to do in going through an area, that can be, it can be gained to some extent, right? Because you can gain access to certain areas going through, countries that are, that have recognized, a legal international border, but don't actually control the border, right? And then you can kind of get in there. So, as far as, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the first step, right, in thinking about your travel plans is to obviously map out and have an understanding of exactly what borders you're going to cross, first of all, and then secondly, whether they're controlled, right, to begin with. We got Italian. Maybe Italian is up now. Italian, can you hear us?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Finally. My apologies for that. A little bit issues with my mic, with my privacy settings, so it's a pain in the ass to, set it up and to be able to talk. So sorry for that.
But Italian, if you're going to be late joining, because of privacy issues, is the only way to go. So glad to hear it.
Yeah, it's pain in the ass to make a mic working. Anyway, all the insights are amazing, guys. I was listening the whole time, and I would say that everything that has been covered till now, it's pretty solid and legit. I want to pinpoint a couple of things that what is my perception on that. Part of it is you said that it's good to have everything on paper. This is what I'm backing 100%. All the boarding passes, it's great to have on paper, so you don't have to deal with your phone or electronic devices, because that's kind of like point of failure if you don't want to have your electronic devices like to be searched. And so everything you can have on paper is really definitely way to go forward. That's just one thing I remember that is quite important in my point of view. And right now we were discussing like how it looks across the globe. My at least experience is that it's kind of one of the hardest parts is getting into US, generally speaking, from like border protection. The like kind of security issues with the United States, there is like more scrutiny, and compared to any other countries, generally speaking, if you're traveling to Latin America, it's kind of like, yeah, officially there is a border, but nobody's like questioning you, and nobody's doing like kind of like a deep searches compared to the US. If you are somehow like triggering kind of like a red alert, or showing kind of like a red flag, and that can be a lot of stuff that can be like a red flag for border protection, then in the US it's kind of, I would say, one of the toughest points to go through. Even though you did nothing wrong, you might just like acting maybe weirdly because you are tired, you're maybe like kind of under the stress because of the other kind of like situations that happening in your life, and like a body language and body reading, all those CBP officers are pretty well trained on that, and maybe like non-standard behavior might get you that red flag, and then going like through searches or more questioning, more scrutiny. So that's kind of my take. Other than that, like I would say that 80% of the globe is kind of okay with all those border immigration parts.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to carrying electronic devices through borders, right? Every time I'm listening to these conversations or having the conversations myself, people kind of go through painstakingly describing different scenarios, like an electronic device that has no data, or an electronic device that's got your data but it's not password protected, that type of thing. And I thought perhaps it might be easier. It might make it easier to have these conversations if we kind of standardize different conditions, right, of passing through borders with electronic devices. And just off the top of my head, I mean, what I was thinking about as far as the categories are, I would call like condition 0, no electronic device at all. So just passing through a border without any device, right? Which seems pretty rare nowadays, right? But presumably some people pass without electronic devices. Condition 1, passing through with an electronic device that has no data, okay? Condition 2, passing through with an electronic device that has data but is password protected. And then the third condition I was thinking about is, the worst, passing through a border with an electronic device that has your data and is not password protected, right? So I was just kind of experimenting with the idea of kind of just standardizing conditions, right? Because I think this issue of protecting data on electronic devices while passing through borders is super timely, and I think it's becoming even more and more important. As it increases in importance, the conversations about it are going to increase. And so, we probably want to have some lingo, right, that we can kind of use and know what one another is talking about. Patrick, what do you think about this? What do you think about the idea of kind of just having conditions, that are agreed upon? And then, secondly, what other conditions are important to talk about? Common scenarios, right, that should be identified and prepared for when passing through a border with an electronic device.
Yeah, I think that these kind of gradations of a scenario make a lot of sense. I mean, I usually speak through specific examples. I think in a perfect world, we all aim for best practices. Um, as they say, I'm not a golfer, but they say that there's no such thing as a perfect golfer, right? You just work your entire life to attempt to be perfect, and you get closer, but you never succeed. I think that that's kind of the best practices format that should probably apply here. Um, yeah, I mean, look, any there are laws in the United States built around the protection of what is personally identifiable information. However, your phone has a ton of personally identifiable information, even if it's not being used for anything nefarious. And so the idea that you have a phone that isn't password protected is in today's day and age is a huge red flag. I would also say that there's, as we have phones that are now, cloud synced. Um, sometimes you see someone's phone and they are like, "Oh, I have 35,000 photos on the cloud through, iCloud services." And it's like, yeah, they may not be all on your phone, but you have immediate access to them if it's hooked up to the internet. So, it's probably good to be able to silo your information if you're not using it. Your phone shouldn't be a treasure trove of legacy information. It should have the information on it that you use. And if you're not using it, it should be somewhere else. No one keeps their social security number on their phone, ideally, because the risk factors are a billion to one as to why you would need to keep it on your phone, right? And that, there's versions of that that are lower stakes for, other information. And so I think, yeah, in a perfect world, if you're going through if you're going through an immigration threshold, it's probably not good to have no password on your phone. It's probably not good to have access to a ton of photos. I mean, it's not any. I guess it's not like big for me to reveal here, but it's like I don't. I have a thing on my calendar where I clear out my phone regularly and archive information so that it's not sitting on a computer or it's not sitting on a phone. And so I think that that's a good practice, right? Like there's no need where you're like, oh, I remember going to this one restaurant where I took a photo of the menu 6 months ago. Like that never happens. Like you don't have to have that on your phone. Uh, and so, and then on top of that, there's other apps that may have information that you might want to keep protected, flight information. Um, but the big key is that if they ever hook your phone up, if they search it, there's different thresholds. And I guess I'm jumping ahead here, but like there is a way to casually look at your phone, and that's the biggest risk for most people. There is an additional step um, where your phone or your laptop is connected to a function where it can download the information and sort it or search it. And in those scenarios, your contact list is probably the biggest security vector or your biggest risk vector. Um, and I don't actually know a good way around that because your contacts generally are stored on your phone. If you have an Android phone, it's stored in Google Contacts. I don't know if there's a way to temporarily remove that from your phone, but yeah, I think if you have any ability to archive old information off your phone, only keep on your phone what is practical and relevant. And then if there's any way to temporarily remove it when going through an immigration threshold, um, and then of course have a password, and don't it's not the four key password is not sufficient. It should be at least six. Um, and it should be something that is memorable and easy to you, but to nobody else. I know that that's really common sense, but you know I've guessed like 10 Apple passcodes in my life because they're so simple. Um, that shouldn't be you. And I think all of these kind of highlight best practices so that if you're in a situation, it throws up all these additional stops, right? Can I have access to your phone? No. But if you're not a citizen, then they do have grounds to access your phone. Well, then there's a passcode on it. Make sure you have it such that your phone automatically locks after a certain time period so that if you unlock it for them, don't tell them the passcode, and then it sits on the desk for 2 minutes, it automatically locks. That's a benefit to you. And then beyond that, if they do have unfettered access to your phone, don't put your life history on it, or don't have access to your life history even through a cloud service. I think all of these make it incrementally better. Um, yeah, I'll ramble on forever, but I'll leave it there.
No, great points. And, we're really talking about privacy protection on at least two levels, right? There's privacy as enforced, or let's call it implemented through technology, right? Which includes kind of, most of the things that you just said. And then there's privacy protected by law, right? And obviously you want to implement and have access to both layers, right, to the extent possible. But the more important layer, in my opinion, is tech, right? Because privacy protected by law requires you obviously to make a claim, make a legal claim, right, and be subject obviously to the cost and the hassle and the difficulty of making a claim under law enforced by the state, and then of course the possibility that you might not actually win in the end, or possibly you win. Maybe you win after the fact, but the cat's already out of the bag. Your privacy has been violated. Your information has been recorded, and possibly is just lying there as a latent liability to be leaked out to hackers at some point in the future, in months or years, right? So tech, you want two layers, right? Tech, and maybe we throw on a third layer there, which is kind of maybe part of tech, but maybe kind of separate, which is kind of just simple best practices, like what Patrick said, right? Just making sure that your phone automatically locks after a certain period of time, having a six figure password instead of 4, etc. Here's a question. Here's a question for Italian and anybody else who wants to answer as well. Um, is the present and future of privacy when crossing borders to wipe your whole phone before you go through, and then basically download all the information afterwards? Is that practical? Obviously we know tech guys can do that, but is that practical enough for, let's call it, the average person, and is that eventually where we're headed?
Yeah, look, I'm gonna throw a couple of best practices. What I believe, I'm gonna a little bit follow up on Patrick. So first thing first, Parvis, you said there are a couple of layers with the devices. First thing, what I believe, what is the best case scenario is that you got a dedicated devices just for traveling, if that's possible. So what I mean by that, you got a laptop just used for traveling, dedicated device for that. You don't store all the data in that device. They are not necessary. The same is like you got a dedicated traveling phone, kind of like a burner phone that you are using for traveling. On the other hand, I totally understand that not everybody is capable or able to do it, especially for those individuals that are living globally. And it's not like just 1 week short trip there and back and you are getting back to your home country. But if you're living like a global lifestyle, that kind of best practice is not kind of workable for you. In that case, I believe that you should have your devices prepared for traveling. And what I mean by that, you mentioned that we got a device that they are totally wiped. Uh, I don't think this is a good approach because it's always causing red flags. So you don't want to like kind of present the device that is totally like wiped. What you want to do is that on the device, you potentially need to present to CBP officers are like kind of with a random clutter. So there might be some photos, there might be maybe not your personal photos, but kind of whatever photos maybe that are from whatever training or photos from a trip to some place, whatever it is, nothing really sensitive in that case. But you don't want to have your phone totally like wiped because that's going to be like, okay, that's not your primary phone. So you should have your phone somehow with having some information on it. The same is with laptop. And now Parvis, back to you. So what I want to say is that with the device and traveling with the device, I believe that for especially global citizens or people that they are living a global lifestyle, we're getting back to the Parvis suggestion, kind of like a using a cloud, and that might be the case. How to everything organize and do. Uh, Before traveling, you're gonna use end-to-end encrypted cloud. And what is really important is that that cloud is end-to-end encrypted, because there is a one kind of like a proverb that generally speaking, cloud is someone else's computer. So you have to, like you're using whatever Dropbox. Dropbox is not a good idea. Dropbox is not a end-to-end encrypted, but there are services that they are end-to-end encrypted, and there are services that also are open source. So what I mean by that is that those services that are open source, you can basically verify, and not only you, but other thousands of people can verify that the service is doing what they are claiming they are doing. So my best kind of advice for everybody would be that you want to have a, end-to-end encrypted open source cloud service, and there are a couple of those that they are existing on the market. You can be pretty sure that nobody else without that private key can access your information. Before traveling, you can store all your sensitive data, or your sensitive photos, or whatever it is, from the computer and from your phone on that cloud. You can just easily sync it. You're traveling with the device that is not totally empty, but it's kind of like totally nothing burger, because it's not saying anything specific. And when you enter the country, you just hook up your phone and your laptop to that iCloud, and you are going to download all those data back to your devices. This is something that at least for now, and even in the future, it's not going, like, from the privacy perspective, it's not going the right way for us. So it's going to be inevitable to use those services, and just be sure that if you are being searched or scanned at the borders, nothing's really on your phone or your computer. Back to Patrick's kind of like idea about phones, what I suggest is that, guys, you probably, I don't know if you heard about it, but there is a system that is not a like standard Android system. It's called GrapheneOS, and it's a like a 100% private uh, system that you can run on a certain devices. One of those devices where you can just put that GrapheneOS and launch it there from the root is Google Pixel. So if you get a Google Pixel phone, you can just reroute it and just install a GrapheneOS there. One of the benefits is it got a kill switch. It can just lock after a couple of minutes, like Patrick said. Another thing is your passcode can be like 20 digits if you want to. There is no problem at all. So you got a much better security. You know exactly what that system is doing. So I would go this route, honestly, if you are really serious about the privacy, because another thing is that you can't really trust the closed source systems. Like if you're using standard Android, it's developed by Google. It's not open source. You don't know what they are doing in the backend, how it's communicating that device. The same is with the Apple devices. You just believe the counterparty, that they don't have a backdoor. And even though that Apple introduced that advanced encryption where you got your own private key, how your data is encrypted, nobody can say if it's the truth, because Apple, again, is not open source. So nobody can verify that Apple got no backdoors, and they might be just claiming it, but you can't be 100% sure. And so that's kind of like a, basic approach to those kind of traveling with the digital, materials and devices. And everybody should be really, in my opinion, like on a high alert these days. And anything you don't have to have in your devices, you shouldn't have in those devices. The same is with contact lists. You can just, put your contact list on your private, server on that encrypted end-to-end encrypted cloud. You don't have to have all those contacts in your phone. So you are really able to limit what the third party can access, and what are their kind of capabilities to do with that. And the last part I want to mention is that border protection, they got especially in the United States, they can ask you to open your device when you are using biometrics. So any face scans or the thumb scan, they can ask you to open it. But when you lock your phone or when you turn off your phone, it's even better. So then you have to introduce your passcode. Sorry, and they cannot ask you to just reveal your password or passcode. So you are much better protected. And a second part there is that when you turn off your computer or turn off your phone, in the same time your RAM is being flushed. So there are no like encryption keys in the RAM in the device. So I really highly suggest everyone who's like going across the borders to turn off your computer, to turn off your phone, because you can't have like kind of, it's like in like a standard situation, it's called like evil maid attack, that if your encryption keys are still stored in the RAM, they can be extracted out of that. But when your device is turned off, so that the RAM is being flushed and there is nothing staying in the RAM. So there might be like some kind of basic approaches, and we can go from there, like somewhere and talk more about.
Stallion, I'm a huge fan of GrapheneOS. I'm a former Android developer myself, but GrapheneOS, one of the other benefits that it provides for people using phones that support it, which currently is limited to Pixel phones, as you mentioned. One of the other benefits is that it's possible using GrapheneOS to have a second profile that gives you plausible deniability if you were to unlock that profile when crossing a border, rather than the typical profile that you might use from day to day. So you could unlock your phone, for a border control officer, and show them, a very limited profile that doesn't have any sensitive information, that would give them a completely different view of your phone than your usual profile, if you wanted to.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Yeah, this is what I forgot to mention. There are so many tweaks you can do on GrapheneOS, and you can have multiple profiles. Basically, you can have one root profile where you can do a lot of other stuff and GPS spoofing, and you can be on a different location even with the GPS, and you are effectively in another location. But in those additional profiles, yeah, you can just dedicate a profile like you said for just crossing borders. So for that scenario, it totally works. That's not a problem at all. In with the computers, it's a little bit more complicated. So but yeah, David, I'm 100% with you.
Wow, that's great info. I'm gonna have to listen back to everything you said, Italian Stallion, and actually take detailed notes. That was phenomenal. Okay, so yeah, maybe the future of passing through borders is going to be dedicated devices, right? And just to follow up real quickly on what you mentioned, Stallion, about turning the cell phone or the laptop off. Do you have any opinion on how far away from the actual border control point a person should turn off the device? Do you think, does it make any difference if they turn it off just 100 feet away versus, I don't know, let's call it 1,000 feet away?
Yeah, I mean, like guys, the I would say like one of the best practices again is like you're getting off the plane. Maybe you were doing some work during your flight, so you're getting off the plane. You are turning off your laptop. You are turning off your phone. Like we mentioned before, everything we got is in a paper form, so you gotta. Oftentimes it's happening like at the borders. Everybody's asking you, okay, can you show me your boarding pass? So you got a boarding pass printing on the paper, so you don't have to turn on your phone, you don't have to turn on your laptop. All these information you might be kind of forced to provide to the CBP officer. You got on a paper. If they ask you where you're going to be staying, so it's somewhere written on a paper. Okay, where are you flying out? Okay, you got maybe your flight out schedule printed on a paper. Hey guys, here's the reservation for my flight, and it's gonna happen in a week. So you always can present and back all those stories you are presenting in a paper form, so you don't have to have access to your digital device, and that's why you are kind of like safe and you secure, in those terms. I think it's much better to evitate any kind of like tweaking, turning off, and finding something in digital devices when it's not necessary, and especially crossing borders. It's the time when you don't want to deal with devices.
Yeah, you read my mind. The very next place I was going to go is discussing, besides the boarding passes, what other documents, what other things are people typically or sometimes tasked with proving when they're crossing the border? And you just touched on a bunch of those. Okay, your lodging, your outbound ticket, right? A lot of countries want to see your proof of onward travel before they let you in. And then another one, which might be a little bit more situation specific, is possible proof of funds, right? Some countries, depending on where you're coming from, what your profile is, might want you to actually prove that you have, enough money to stay there without working unlawfully. The reason I say that might be specific, is because obviously, when you kind of, showing information about your bank account, assuming you're not just, carrying cash, there is a little bit of a cost in terms of information that you're giving about yourself, a little bit of privacy cost. What other types of documents do you think are useful to have in paper when you're passing through a border, right? Without giving up too much privacy, or did we cover them all?
Yeah, like you mentioned proof of funds. In those terms, if you really have to, and let's say your travels are long and not just a week in the country, so in that case, you might need to have a proof of funds, enough funds that are more than $10,000. And in that case, I don't say it's ideal, but still it's better to, have like having an extract from your bank account on a paper, again, printed. If a CBP officer asks for a funds, you can say, look, here's my bank account extract, and I got enough funds to stay in the country for whatever, 90 days. If you can, again, evitate to disclose that information, it's much better. And I'm a little bit old school in that way. And like I said, majority of the countries across the globe, they got a limit of $10,000 that you can carry on in cash. So even though it might kind of carry some additional risk from a physical OPSEC situation, then it's still, I would say, a better kind of deal than disclosing what you got on your bank account. If you don't have a really dedicated bank account for, let's say, that traveling. Yeah, if you're running multiple bank accounts, okay, so you can just put on the bank account enough kind of funds that can cover your trip. But rather than that, you can say, guys, don't worry, here's my cash. I got enough cash. It's, maximum $10,000 here. I got a $9,000. It's enough for my stay. You can just prove it. And nobody knows much information about you. So as little as you can you can disclose, it's much better. And I just right now remembered one more thing I want to just mention with those digital kind of devices. Always try to have backups for your second authentication. The thing is that it's not that rare that sometimes you can just lose your device, let's say your phone, and there can be different reasons, and sometimes it can even happen that they are going to just confiscate your device, or somebody can steal your device during a trip or travels. And just imagine that you got a, like a TOTP for a second authentication. A lot of people are using like a Google Authenticator, which is not the best in my opinion, because you can have another ones that they are again open source, but you want those codes to have a backup of those. Because if you lose the device, you lost all the, second authentication. The same is with your password managers. I would say these two things are absolutely crucial. I mean, like, okay, hey guys, you just, like mug me on the street. Okay, take that, laptop or take a phone. It's not a problem. But the problem with the TOTP or with the password managers are that if you don't have a backups, so you're having a hard time to access anything. You have a hard time to get to your bank account. You got a hard time to get any services you're using daily. So try to have, these backups, put it on your, USB sticks, maybe one, maybe two, have a backup of a backup. You just encrypt it. And so even though you lose that USB stick, nobody can, do anything with that because it can be encrypted. And that's solving all, I would say, issues, because that's not rare, like losing a device. And I would say for phones, it's even like a much more probable than for laptops. So you can maybe even leave it in a, like a charger, at the airport. You're sitting there, you're waiting for your flight. Now there is a last call. Wow, I need to run to the gate, and you leave a phone in a charger. Your device is lost. And if you don't have those backups, you're totally done. So that would be like my just another kind of information back to those devices. But yeah, that's it.
It's really great info, Italian. Follow-up question, Italian Stallion. And sorry, I just got to keep coming back to you because you're providing, like, you're opening so many different branches of discussion. Do you think there's any difference practically in OPSEC considerations based off of the citizenship and passport that a person is traveling on?
Yeah, like can you be more specific a little bit? I got some kind of information on the passports, but yeah, can you be a bit more specific?
So should a person's best practices for OPSEC crossing borders change materially based off of, let's say, for example, they're a Canadian citizen traveling to Europe versus if they're a Nigerian citizen traveling to Europe? Do you think that makes much of a difference in what OPSEC practices they should employ?
Yeah, I believe so. Unfortunately, the whole globe is kind of having like a profiling on people, and based on citizenship, I think you're definitely being profiled by CBP officers, and your passport is like kind of not the only thing that matters, but it's one of the things that matter. So it's a huge difference. It's if your passport is from EU or United States versus that the passport is from, some African country. Then it's going to be much more complicated to get into the country, and probably will be more scrutiny from CBP officers to, have a more like a due diligence and checking on you.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's more scrutiny and due diligence on people coming from certain countries. But my question is, do you think the the practices that a person should employ for their own OPSEC? So all the examples you just brought up, the wonderful examples you just brought up, would you tell somebody who's a Canadian citizen traveling to Europe, just to stay with my same example, is to do the same things to protect their OPSEC as, let's call it, the Nigerian person traveling to Europe? Or do you think, is it mostly the same what they should do to protect themselves? And we understand, of course, all other things being equal, over 100 entries, the Nigerian person is going to get more, diligence and scrutiny. But should it change what that Nigerian, citizen traveling on a Nigerian passport does as far as their own OPSEC?
Yeah, I believe that's look, maybe there's a higher probability that you are going to be put aside if you're from a country that is not like from how to put it, like a first world. I don't like that word, because like first world is not first world anymore, and it's kind of like a changing. But yeah, like let's say, like you mentioned, people from Nigeria probably will have a higher chance to be maybe put aside, but still the approach and kind of OPSEC practices should be the same, especially with devices, because you never know. Like if maybe, the thing is with the kind of like a screening, it's kind of it's called behavior profiling. And all those CBP officers are being trained, like what is your body language, what is your behavior, if there's are any signs of nervousness, if your, for example, travel patterns prior to arriving to that country were kind of unusual, or if they were from from high risk region countries, if they're asking you a basic kind of questions, where are you going to be staying, how long, if you got a outbound flight, you're kind of inconsistent, your stories are inconsistent. So all those are kind of things that can turn everything upside down. So I believe that everyone, no matter what your passport is, should be prepared for that. That can happen really, like a shitstorm can happen at the borders. And if you're not ready for it, so then you are a loser. So you definitely should be 100% for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you keep bringing up the next topics that I want to talk about. So you touched on this issue of profiling, body language, how nervous a person feels, what their answers are to particular questions. And I think that's a perfect segue to this, what I would consider fourth category of privacy, right? The first category we spoke about is, privacy in your electronic devices, right? Second category, privacy in your physical things that you're bringing with you, which Patrick spoke on a lot. And then we have that third category, which is what is the information that your passport throws out, okay, based off of where it's issued, your place of birth, whether the passport indicates that you're a dual citizen or not. And then there's another category, which is what if you're questioned? What if you're interrogated? Okay, you're being tasked with giving up information basically about yourself. And I find this category to be kind of one of the trickiest because so much of what you can refuse to answer and what the consequences are if you refuse to answer is extremely country specific, right? And it's I think it's more difficult to generalize. I still think we can identify some general patterns, to operate off of. And the first pattern that I think about is that you can you can afford to be more belligerent. I don't even want to call it belligerent. I think you can afford to be more tough and refusing and steadfast and refusing to answer questions when you're entering one of your own countries of citizenship, right? Because generally speaking, right, people have a right of return to their own country, internationally recognized. Yes, it's not always, abided by different countries, but generally, the country is gonna have the most difficult time excluding you from entry is your own country of citizenship, right? And I've been in this situation where I've been re-entering the United States, and I hate, it makes me bristle that CBP asks questions about what you are doing abroad, and they demand to know the answer. So I have gone through. I've refused to answer sometimes. And I went into the times that I decided ahead of time, if they ask me this, I'm going to refuse all the way through no matter what. I was prepared for the consequences. So, for example, in one instance, I had a connecting flight. I was prepared to miss the connection if necessary. And the connecting flight was actually after a fairly significant layover. It was about a 3-hour layover. So in those times, well, I've done it a couple times. In one time in particular that I remember, I was asked, I was coming back from the Caribbean. I was asked by the CPP officer, what were you doing there? And I responded, I'm not going to answer any questions other than me being a U.S. citizen. And I made that carve out there because the basis of my right to return to the United States is the fact that I was a U.S. citizen, right? And so I was fine to answer questions about that. He repeated the question. I repeated my answer. He kind of snorted to himself, called somebody over. They took me to secondary inspection. And I went to secondary inspection, and I was basically they just brought through a number of agents to come through and ask me the same question. And I had my same line that I was repeating, okay, which is I'll be happy to answer any questions about being a US citizen. I'm not answering any other questions about what I was doing abroad or anything else, right? And I even had a supervisor come in and he kind of like threatened me. And, I don't think I gave the appearance of being like a serious person. I was like flip-flops and shorts, that type of stuff. Long story short, they just held me for about 2 hours. I refused steadfast. They did their things. I'm sure they were doing searches, about me. And then eventually they just let me go. And I went through, right? Now, I did that. I felt confident to do that because, and I'm open about this, so this is no news. I'm a citizen of the United States. And so I felt comfortable doing that. Would I be comfortable doing that, entering a country in which I'm not citizen or I don't even have a right of residency? No, I'd be much less comfortable doing that as a default, right? So that's I think one of the main considerations as far as answering questions. But the second thing that comes to my mind is, if you are entering a country, right, and you don't, either you're not prepared to refuse to answer questions or you don't think you're not going to want to do that. Let's say you're entering a country, you're trying to enter a country, as a tourist, which you don't have the right to enter. I think you should be prepared to answer questions. You should think through what are the common questions that I might be asked going through here, and what are my answers. And I would even practice, and I do this actually, just a quick practice in my own mind, okay, of that person asking the question and me answering the question. Part of it is so that I know what's the answer that I'm going to go to. And part of it goes to Italian Stallion's point, okay, which is if you're trying to think up of the answer in the moment and you're fumbling and bumbling and stuttering, that's all data. That's information. That observation is information that's taken by the CBP officers. And sometimes, especially if you're a person that gets tongue-tied or tripped up on your words, that type of bumbling, stuttering response is what can invite extra scrutiny on you and have you be taken to secondary inspection, right? So the question of how to handle being asked questions, especially invasive questions, when you're coming into the United States, is one of the most difficult. I think it's probably the most difficult aspect of how to handle privacy and OPSEC when passing through borders. But I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks. Let me kick it back, Italian. I'm going to kick it back to you one more time, and then I'm going to ask Patrick what he thinks about this. What do you think, Italian, about practices for answering or for dealing with invasive questions that you might be asked at a border?
Yeah, look, it's kind of, you never know what's gonna happen. That's the first thing. The best is like to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Anyway, like I believe, and my experience, generally speaking, is, of course, I had some kind of fuck ups, like you mentioned. I think everybody who's traveling often, sometimes like going for a secondary inspections and so on. But I believe that the first kind of line of defense is to be really concise and strict with your answers. So, and those standard answers everywhere, I believe, across the globes are, okay, where are you coming from? Maybe show me your boarding pass. Where you're going to be staying, how long you're going to be staying, when you're flying out, do you have enough funds to, maintain yourself? If you're 100% clear about it, yes, I'm coming here for a week. Yeah, I'm going to be staying in Las Vegas. Okay, what you're going to be doing there? I'm going to be, gambling, and I want to visit a show. Your questions are strict, concise, without a hesitation, pretty straightforward. So then there is like kind of low chance that you are going to be having a secondary inspection. This is what I believe. And I would say that, US CBP officers are one of the like kind of hardest in those terms compared to other countries I've been at. And there are many of them. So that's kind of like I think being prepared, what you mentioned, is definitely really worth it. It's saving you a lot of kind of like struggles. Also, your body language is really, really important. And maybe I would add, and a little bit circling back to the point number 3, is like being really sure what kind of passports you are entering, with what passport you're entering to the country. So really having a plan, like, okay, I'm entering with the passport XYZ. You need to really decide prior to that if you're flying with your passport number 1 or 2 or 3. What I want to also add to that is that there are countries that allowing you to have a multiple passports and still have a one citizenship. But it's kind of good kind of security measure, because like you can have a multiple passport from the same country, and you can divide those passports like kind of like a jurisdictionally, and use one passport for countries they are friends, and another passports for another countries that they are friends together, and a third passports for maybe a little bit like kind of countries that they are excluded. And it still shows one citizenship, but they are different passport numbers, and it's kind of helping. I give you an example. So if you're traveling to Lebanon and then you want to go to Israel, so you are not able to do it with one passport. So you need to have a multiple passports, and like trying to like break the connection between one and another passport. So having multiple passports, even though you got a multiple citizenship, is a really good practice. And oftentimes it's really also important in the case like that you might be in a country that might not be on a kind of like a restricted list, but let's say not a kind of friendlies, and you need to do, for example, the immigration out of the country on the passport you entered, but then you are boarding the flight with another passport, because there's a huge difference between what airlines knows and what that CBP officer knows. So you can even at the same one airport showing a different passport when you are leaving the country, but you're booking your flight with another passport number. And then that passport number you're presenting at the country of arrival. So because then you are going through, because that airline is feeding all the data to that CBP officers of the country of arrival. So then you need to be really sure about when you're showing what kind of passport, but it's really works. It's protecting your privacy. It's protecting your kind of like a travel schedule, where you've been, and so on, because maybe your flight was not a direct to the country of your arrival, and you were going through a couple of stuff, and you can say, oh, I'm flying from Madrid to New York, but on the other hand you were flying from Nigeria to Madrid, and then from Madrid to New York. So you got a lot of options how to deal with that, and kind of like protect your privacy.
Yeah, great points. Two things I wanted to just piggyback on. So first of all, a lot of CBP officers are trained to ask questions in a specific way. And maybe some people here have noticed it. A lot of them will ask you really quick, rapid fire questions, really quick. You give an answer and then they just shoot back a question. And it's designed to get you kind of in the rhythm of just responding really quickly, or if you're breaking from responding really quickly, really showing, illustrating basically that you're thinking now about the answer. Okay, whereas before it was like, you're just, giving the truth, the answer comes right to your mind, and then now you're really thinking about it, right? So, and again, this might be getting a little bit too much in the weeds, but I don't match that rhythm when I'm being asked a question. Okay, when I'm asked a question, if they want to ask rapid fire, they can ask, but when I'm answering, I just answer at my own regular pace, right? Second thing, completely agree with the importance of conciseness, okay, as Italian Stallion mentioned. And being concise with your answers is something that serves you in so many other aspects of global mobility, not just border crossing. It helps you. It serves you when you're applying for residency. If you have an interview, it serves you if you're applying for naturalization. It serves you when you're crossing borders, right? So, just as an example, this week I'm representing a client at a hearing for a denial of naturalization, right? And as a result, we're expecting her to be interviewed as well with me present there, right? And as part of my preparation for people that are applying for immigration benefits, I tell them to be concise. Exactly what Italian Stallion said. I say, be concise. Listen carefully. Wait till the entire question is being asked. Listen carefully. Answer the question if you understood it. If you don't understand, say you don't understand, and be concise. And I drive this point home by saying that there's 4 types of answers which are totally fine if they're appropriate. Okay. The first one is yes. The second is no. The third is I don't know. The fourth is I don't remember. Now, I said they're totally appropriate. I'm sorry, they're totally fine if appropriate. That means if you're, for example, asked a yes/no question, you can answer yes or no. They can follow up. The CBP officers, USCIS officers, other country officers are trained to follow up with questions if they want. Okay. Now, those answers are not obviously appropriate if you're asked, something that's not a yes/no question, to explain something if you do know the answer, right? But conciseness is critical. Just, as concise as possible without evading the question, assuming, of course, that you're not trying to, evade the question for some reason. This could be a whole nother conversation, but maybe there's some instances in which you have to actually evade the question. But assuming that that's not the case, and that should not be the case in the majority of instances, just answer directly, clearly, and as concise as possible. And I agree that does typically have the effect of kind of just having them move you along and avoid secondary inspection. Patrick,
I can
go ahead.
wrap it up with one sentence, Parvis, what you just said, and that is for OPSEC. That's a proverb, and that's a loose lips sink ships, and that's exactly what it means with the CBP officers, what it means with the immigration officers or citizenship interviews. Loose lips sink ships. Always think about it. You don't want to talk too much in those instances. You want to be as concise as possible. You talking too much, it's just a burden for you.
Beautifully said. Patrick, what do you think about the aspect of OPSEC, which is questioning? Questioning, I guess, is the nicer way, the nicer side of things. Interrogation is the meaner side of things. What do you think are some best practices? What do you think about this attack vector?
Yeah, I think it's I'm glad that we're kind of getting into the weeds on this, because the questions that they ask I know from an intelligence perspective, right? You can't tell if someone's lying based on just like reading their face or habits, right? There's a couple giveaways, but generally speaking, people are unique. And so one of the ways that an officer from CBP might overcome that is they quickly want to establish a baseline. What is your normal response to a low stakes or non stakes question? How's the weather? This is going to be laughable. I actually had a CBP officer first question once ask me who my favorite superhero was. Um, and it's just their way to get a baseline. So then when they say, what was the purpose of your trip? If you say something and your behavior deviates from how you first established yourself, then that provides them grounds to say, maybe there's something suspicious here. And so I think that like maintaining a consistent style along with the conciseness of an answer is key, which I believe is, for me personally is difficult. I'm like very chatty. I tend to be analytical. And so when people ask me a question, I usually take a couple seconds to think about it because I'm comfortable with silence and I want to give a thoughtful answer. And that doesn't always serve me the best at a border passing. Um, and I would also argue that any OPSEC piece at a port of entry in an airport is important. Multiply it by a multiple of like 1.5 at a land border, just because that we could do a whole episode on land borders, but the potential vectors for risk are even greater. And so I think having your answers down as to the purpose of your trip, how long you're going to be there, and you basically want to have a concise answer that allows the CBP officer to check the box and say, this person knows why they're here. It's not against the law, right? They're not coming here to, illegally search for work. They have their own funds. People have been recently turned away because they mentioned that sometimes they do online consulting or online, like passive income stuff. That Don't say that. It opens you up to a vector. If you're here visiting, like, you don't want to be taking away jobs from local citizens. That's a pretty big, dynamic in most countries. Um, you know, uh, and keep it concise. Know why you're there. Know when you're heading out. And the last piece, and I just slipped my mind. The last piece that I was going to add was that, yeah, and make sure you're not a public charge, right? And I say that because, as someone who is more on the research and history side of naturalization and citizenship by descent, the idea that someone, whether or not they're on a tourist visa or they're, an immigrant visa, that is like 100-year-old rule, to not be a public charge. And so that's why proof of funds, length of your stay in the country, and your they basically want you there spending a little bit of money, doing inconsequential things, and then getting out of there. And so if you can communicate that in 3 words instead of 5, that's going to save you every time.
Yeah, Patrick, you perfectly described kind of the dynamic I was talking about, which is the CBP officers shooting questions to get a baseline of how do you respond. And then, to really kind of illustrate the difference, like the delta from when you actually, deviate from the way you normally respond to questions. I got a couple of things I wanted to say about what I wanted to piggyback on, but Italian, go ahead. You were trying to speak.
No, I just wanted to, follow up on Patrick. Patrick, if you're interested to talk about like land borders, that's something I'm interested in to talk about too. And I disagree with you, like at least in Latin America. So like land borders are much simpler than, arriving at the airport. So there are a lot of loopholes to go through the land borders, and maybe the experience in the US are totally different that I am not able to speak about. But I definitely would love to chat about it. It might be a really interesting topic to go through, how to be crossing land borders. So that's but I would say that's totally another kind of space for 1 hour, and that's not a time for that right now.
That is a really interesting topic, and that's one that so there's a number of important differences between the two. One is, of course, when you travel by flight, not airports, airlines, in addition to the actual border points, have their own requirements as far as travel documents. There's also, other little quirks. For example, when you're passing through a border, sometimes you can run into the situation where the border officer does not actually check your documentation, right? And I've spoken about this in one of our last spaces. I think it was like 6 spaces again. So many people were led into the United States through land borders, over the years, and without their documentation being checked, that it actually created this big issue for those people later when they tried to apply for a status within the country that required them to show that they arrived. And as a result, there's now this thing called a Quintanilla crossing, which means basically somebody who came into the United States, they presented themselves to the border, to the border patrol, and the border protection officer just waved them through. It's also called a wave through, without even checking their documents. So they never got a stamp. They don't have proof of it, right? So there's a lot of I think it's a really fascinating topic. I'm as interested as both you guys are in this. I would make it another mobility space if you guys want to do it here. If you want to do it on one of your own platforms as well, that'd be awesome, and I would love to join in on that. The difference between land crossings and let's call it other, which of course includes flight.
Yeah, I like that idea.
One
to
thing.
clarify with Stallion, I agree. I was kind of focused on the U.S. border aspect. But yeah, I haven't crossed the Latin American border by land, but other countries are a little bit different. Of course, very much so in Europe. But yeah, I had an unfortunately a very American perspective.
Go ahead, Alex.
One thing worth mentioning is that you can have a very different experience depending on if you have, at least this is US context, the quadruple S status. So the quadruple S status is a secondary screening status where usually at the gate when you're boarding on the way to the US, they'll give you an additional pat down and they'll swab your bag and check it for any problematic chemicals. And then typically when you enter with the quadruple S status, you also get a different questioning, a more aggressive questioning when you enter. So it's something to keep in mind of is when you print out your boarding pass, see if it has 4 S's on it or some other similar type of mark that signifies you were selected for enhanced screening.
Great point, Alex. And I've had that happen more than once, especially in my late teens and early 20s. That was around 2002, 3, 4. And yeah, that's definitely a thing for some people.
And maybe even to consider is I think they can put you on it if you cause problems for them. So if you're at the border and you're being difficult, I would not be surprised if they can put you on the quadruple S list and basically flag you as a person of interest going forwards.
Karen's at the border, huh?
Just from personal experience, I have never been given that status, but I have noticed that I do get more. There was a time period where I traveled to some unfriendly countries, and immediately thereafter, I had my standard questions at U.S. land borders went from like 3 to 7, just almost on cue. So I know that there's the ability for them to tag you in multiple ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing we've touched on. So go ahead, Alex.
They also have patterns that increase your probability. So last minute flights, one-way flights, things like that increase your probability of quadruple S. And I noticed that myself. Usually when I get it is I booked a flight pretty last minute. It's a one-way flight, and then I end up on the list. So you can kind of research about it. There's a lot of people try to reverse engineer the algorithm. And then also I've also had issues when a lot of travel to Honduras, they were kind of just like, this is not normal. So we want to know what you're doing, what's going on, things like that. And I've even been to secondary as well relating to that. But I think generally, usually it kind of settles down. If you just continue the same pattern, then it ceases to be interesting for them because they look at my passport and they see 20 stamps entering Honduras, then it's like, oh, well, it's not been a problem so far, so I guess it's normal for him.
Yeah, you're right, Alex. 100% exactly. Late, last minute bookings are the reason to flag you. The same is like like the kind of difficult regions where you're traveling from. So all these aspects are kind of red flag to put you on that list. And also I cannot just like talk from my own experience, but there also might be to put you on a list for future if you're kind of like evasive with answers and being kind of like complicated with during the interview. So you might be flagged for future, and especially if you combine all of those 3 together, like high risk regions, last minute bookings, complicated during the interview, you're gonna definitely end up there.
If we could briefly bounce back to the first subject that we discussed today, the RFID in passports, I was wondering what particular attack vectors are we concerned about with RFID of passports? Because ultimately, passports in general get scanned, at least the one that you're using to enter a country and to leave a country. I'm curious if there are additional attack vectors if somebody has multiple passports on their person. Maybe there's more, intense scanning at a border crossing or something like that. I'm wondering what the real attack vector is, because it seems like all the information that might be gleaned from an RFID chip is pretty well known by the country that you're entering. Or
yeah, well, the first thing that comes to my mind is a private individual with an RFID reader just trying to scan your passport and gleaning all the information in it to use against you, especially if used in conjunction with other information that might be known publicly about you. So that would be my first concern. And then the other thing is, people, yeah, your point is well taken, David, right? When you're entering and exiting, jurisdiction, their border control typically will have that information. But people, I think, wrongly assume that law enforcement and governments and countries are monoliths, and they're not. They're very much oftentimes split into different agencies with incomplete information sharing, or sometimes even information siloing. Right? There's notorious angling and competition between agencies in different countries to not share information, with one another. And that can be for all sorts of different reasons. Sometimes it could be purely political. Sometimes it could be because of, some sort of laws that they have in that country that indicate that information is only to be shared in certain instances with certain approvals, etc. So I wouldn't start from the assumption that jurisdictions, that law and government in jurisdictions are monoliths, that if one of them has your passport information, that means all of the agencies in that country has your information. What do you think, Italian?
Yeah, you're right. I agree. I would add that probably the biggest threat might be like kind of nefarious actor at the crowded places. I think that probably the highest probability is to scan your credit cards or your debit cards than the passport data. But on the other hand, you don't want to, for these nefarious actors to leak your data from the passport. And it doesn't matter if it's your ID card from the country or a passport. So yeah, it's good to protect. As everybody said, it's kind of like $10-15 to get the RFID blocker. On the other hand, there is another solution to that, is like if you're probably traveling with a backpack these days. You got a backpacks with RFID, kind of like a pouch, also like implemented in backpacks where you can put your items not to be scanned. And second thing is that if your backpack is kind of like a little bit kind of complex with a lot of pouches inside, so if you don't have your passports or credit cards in your back pocket in your pants, then and it's somewhere inside the backpack, it's still pretty well protected and nobody can scan it even with a RFID reader, because that's too far. They don't even know where it is. So most kind of attacks are happening that I can identify a person in front of me, standing and queuing to board a plane. Somebody is behind me, like 1 foot, and they can scan, whatever credit card from my back pocket because like they got a RFID reader. So yeah, that would be probably my first pick, just to protect against the bad actors. And that kind of protecting against these agencies, it's I would say it's going to be much more complicated.
Yeah, and then also that information can be used for social engineering attacks, right? Imagine somebody standing in line, like Italian said, behind you. They use a scanner to identify your name, and they come up and say, "Oh, hey, are you Patrick? Oh yeah, don't you remember? Boom, 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 boom." And then before you know it, they're in a conversation and they're trying to scam you or conduct some sort of social engineering attack on you. Mark Twain, I think it was, famously said, "It's easier to fool a man than to convince a man that he's been fooled." And I think that's such an important quote. We all think that we're above social engineering attacks. Oh no, that would never happen to me. No, I'm one of the last people to get scammed or fooled or all that type of stuff. It's a hubristic attitude, and of course, some people are more gullible than others. But I think from the standpoint of security and OPSEC, we should all be operating from the starting assumption that although it might be more difficult for you to be scammed than the others. We're all capable of being scammed or kind of violated some way in that form.
Yeah, and I would add
Yeah,
to
I'll
that
add on
it's
this.
also like, yeah,
Go ahead, Stallion.
that's it. Okay, so I would add to that is that what is really important is it's called aggregate effect. So let's say that somebody is going to scan your passport. They got your name, like you said, it's part of a social engineering, but then it's much easier to search your name. And I would assume, and I would kind of confidently say that a lot of people are using social media with their real name. Then I can just do the OSINT research and trying to get as much information as possible from a social media about that specific individual. I can probably dig into the relationships, who is wife or a partner, if they got kids, where probably did they live, because a lot of people are not really taking care of their privacy in those terms, so they are going to be posting photos about their new car, and they bought a house, and oftentimes they're putting the photos with geotagging. So then I will be able to know that the person is coming from that country. They are living in this city on that street. Now they are vacationing in Bahamas on a nice beach for 14 days. And then I got a lot of information to exploit those data. And if there is a nefarious actor against me, and it can be kind of organized, gangs or individuals, so they can process the robbery, or they can exploit you. They know your patterns, they know what you're doing. So it can just start with as simple as like scanning your passport, but that gives you enough information to do additional research, and within a 30, maybe 40 minutes, you got a ton of data on that individual according to family members. And I would be saying like a Pareto rule is 80-20. So like 80% of every individual across the globe, they don't care about privacy. Maybe there are those 20% that they know a little bit about it, but your chance and your probability to scan a passport of some interested individual is pretty like high chance, and very likely that you can use it for another kind of extortions or bad kind of intentions.
Great point. So we got a bunch of people that have joined us here. Reminder, this is our 15th mobility space. This is an open discussion. Anybody can speak. If you want to speak, send me a request and I'll approve it right away. Okay, I think somebody was trying to speak. Was that you, Alex, or Patrick? Couple topics that I think are interesting for a next one. So first of all, I do want to do an entire space on consular assistance as a benefit of citizenship. But I think if I can get Radha Sterling, it would just supercharge that discussion. Radha Sterling from Detained in Dubai, who's just been an expert in utilizing citizenship and and the consular assistance benefit in order to get our clients out of sticky situations. So I think we're not going to be able to do that one for Thursday. So here are some possible options for the next topic. One is the topic that Italian and Patrick brought up, which is the differences in land border crossings versus points of entries at airports. What are the important differences that people should know about and can use to their benefits to increase their mobility? That's one topic. Another topic I'm interested in possibly discussing next would be passport without citizenship, right? So if anybody here is familiar with me, I'm like a broken record for the last 5 years saying over and over again, passport is not citizenship. And that means different things, right? Even when a person has a passport pursuant to their own citizenship, it's still not the same thing. But we also have passports. We also have travel documents that are issued that are not actually issued to citizens. These are passports that are issued by one country to stateless individuals or individuals that are, citizens of other countries. And then we have even passports that are issued by non-governmental organizations. So I think that would be an interesting space to do. And then, so I'll put those two up there. What do you guys think? Is there any other topic that you would like to talk about for our next space?
Yeah, I'll just echo. I think the land border could be really unique. We can also throw in like crossing a border on train or by like cruise ship as a bonus.
Yeah, you know what? It just occurred to me if we do that one, I'd want Italian to at least have the ability to show up, you know, timing wise, even if he's not able to, and he may be jammed up. Italian is Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time available for you, or is that too soon? If so, we can push off that topic to you know, a different week that would work for you.
Yeah, guys. Again, not sure, not 100% sure that I can make it on Thursday, honestly. So I can't promise it 100%, to be absolutely honest with you.
No problem. Let's, you know what? I should have thought of this before I floated that as a possible topic. Let's push off on that topic for now, just to give a little bit of space, because Italian does a lot of content on his own channels as well. So I'm going to basically just think of a few other topics, and then I'll put up a poll, as I often do, and kind of let the crowd decide what we speak on next. Anybody have a topic? Oh, we got Philippe here. Welcome, Philippe.
Thank you, Parvi. Sorry to jump in here so late, but one idea that I had come to my mind was, is there a benefit or disadvantage of using unrecognized states in mobility? So for entrances, for visas, for banking, these sorts of topics.
But I would think that would be a subtopic of whenever we do the space on kind of, let's call it alternative passports or passport without citizenship. Yeah, we'll definitely touch on that.
Fair point. Fair point.
Okay, great. So if nobody has any suggestions, I'm going to think of 3 other suggestions in addition to passport without citizenship. Stay tuned. I'm going to put up a poll. Okay. Vote on the poll if you'd like. All right. And we're going to have our next mobility space in 2 days on Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's going to be our 16th space. Remember, the format is open discussion. Anybody can speak. And we're going to do 50 mobility spaces this year on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty, and passports. I haven't uploaded these yet to a podcast platform, but I'm going to soon. So I'm going to just commit and say within the next week, all of these back episodes, as well as future ones, will be available on Spotify, Apple, probably Podbean, and a few others. So thank you, everybody, for joining, especially Italian Stallion. Thank you for joining, especially Patrick, who's been a great co-host on a lot of these. David, thanks for your contribution. Philippe, and everybody else who's listening anonymously as well. Have a great one.